6 of them are taking your money and laughing at you. 3 of them are doing something the Swiss watch industry hasn't seen before. And no, the 3 you should trust are not the ones with the most famous names. Let's get into it. Brand 6, Bell & Ross. So, 2 watches, same movement, built in the same Swiss factory. One costs roughly $6,000, the other costs nearly $10,000. What's the difference? One of them is a Tudor, the other is a Bell & Ross BRX5. The BRX5 is a genuinely impressive piece of engineering. The case is a 12-part titanium sandwich, and that's not a figure of speech. It is literally stacked and screwed together like a mechanical puzzle, with a screw-down crown, sapphire glass on both sides, and a Kenissi caliber BR Cal 323 inside. COSC certified chronometer. 72-hour power reserve, variable inertia balance wheel, 5-year warranty. On paper, it delivers. And the Kenissi movement is not a shortcut. It is the same base caliber Tudor runs in the Black Bay and the Pelagos, the same base Chanel uses in the J12, the same one Norqain runs in its sport watches. Kenissi is 20% owned by Tudor, which is owned by Rolex. You're dealing with serious movement architecture, assembled properly, tested to chronometer standards. So here's the question the forums have been asking since the Tudor Black Bay 58 received full METAS Master Chronometer certification in 2025. Why does a Tudor Pelagos FXD with an identical mechanical foundation, better water resistance at 500 meters, a METAS certification that goes significantly beyond COSC, and a 40-year dive heritage, cost roughly $3,000 less than the BRX5 Black Titanium? The honest answer is the square case. Bell & Ross charges a meaningful premium for the cockpit instrument aesthetic. The circle in a square design philosophy, inspired by aircraft dashboard instruments, is genuinely distinctive. Nothing else on the market looks like a BR05 or a BRX5. If that visual identity resonates with you, it's a real and defensible reason to buy. The design is not a gimmick, but watch this closely. At $5,350, the METAS certified Black Bay 58 is now offering a more rigorously tested movement in a more proven tool watch format, with better water resistance for nearly half of what Bell & Ross is asking. A thread on Watch You Seek from late 2025 captured this well. A member who owned both watches wrote that the Bell & Ross is the watch he wears to restaurants. The Pelagos is the watch he forgets he's wearing. He meant it as a compliment to both. The economics buried in his next post were harder to ignore. Buy the Bell & Ross because you love the shape? That's a legitimate reason. Don't buy it because you think the movement justifies the price gap over Tudor. The Kenissi caliber is a shared engine. The BRX5 is charging you for the body it lives in. Bell & Ross at least gives you something different to look at. Brand number 5 is charging you legacy prices for a spec sheet it doesn't always put in front of you. Brand 5 Breitling. Walk into a Breitling boutique. Point at any Navitimer on the display. Ask the sales associate, "Is this a B1?" Watch what happens. About half the time, you get a vague answer about Breitling's 70-year aviation heritage. Maybe a mention of the slide rule bezel, its original role as an instrument for pilots at the Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association, which commissioned it in 1952. Occasionally, you get a confident nod that may or may not be accurate. Here is what they don't always volunteer. Not everything called a Navitimer contains Breitling's in-house B1 caliber. The caliber B1 is a legitimate manufacturer chronograph. Breitling developed it over several years and debuted it in 2009 to mark the brand's 125th anniversary. It is their technical statement piece, column wheel, vertical clutch, 70-hour power reserve, 346 components, COSC certified. If you buy a Navitimer with B1 on the specification sheet, you are getting something Breitling is rightfully proud of. The vertical clutch matters more than it sounds. In a cam lever chronograph, pressing the pusher to start the timer produces a tiny jump in the chronograph seconds hand as it engages. In a vertical clutch system, the engagement is smooth and immediate. The hand starts exactly where it should. Experienced collectors notice this. It is the difference between a properly engineered chronograph and one that merely works. The problem is that the Navitimer name stretches across a lineup, where not every reference uses the B1. Older cataloged pieces, certain time-only Navitimer variants, and some still-available references run different calibers. The case looks identical. The slide rule bezel is the same. The dial says Navitimer. But open the wrong case back and you're looking at a different engine entirely. Breitling has been working to address this, pushing more B1 references to the forefront over the past several years. But legacy dealer inventory and the breadth of the catalog mean the situation still requires vigilance from buyers. On Chrono 2.4 right now, Navitimer models run from roughly $4,000 to well above $10,000. The ones at the lower end of that range are not bargains if you're expecting manufacturer movement architecture throughout. The rule is simple. Check the reference number. Look up the specification sheet before anything else. If you don't see B1, B3, B9, or another designated in-house Breitling manufacturer caliber in the movement field, you are buying the name, the history, the slide rule, and the bracelet. All of those things are genuine and beautiful. At $5,000 or $6,000, beautiful heritage is not a sufficient answer on its own. Breitling's marketing is exceptional. Their non-B01 movements are technically capable instruments, but you deserve to know exactly what you're paying for before the card goes through. Which Navitimer is in your collection? Drop the reference in the comments. At least with Breitling, the answer is clear if you know what question to ask. Brand number 4 built its reputation honestly and is now quietly testing the loyalty of the buyers who built that reputation. Brand 4, Seiko Prospex. Seiko Prospex earned its reputation the hardest possible way. The original one, 1009, 165 Seiko Diver, reference 6000, 217 to 8001, was a technically serious instrument built at a moment when Japanese watchmaking was still proving itself to a world that assumed Switzerland had a monopoly on horological credibility. It achieved 150-meter water resistance, using a double-sealed case construction before most Swiss dive watches were even rated to 100 meters. By the 1970s, Seiko movements were entering international accuracy competitions against Swiss calibers and occasionally winning. The Prospex line inherited that legacy, and for a long time, the value proposition was genuinely unbeatable. The SKX 007 became the community's shorthand for exactly what a tool watch should be. Screw-down crown, 200-meter water resistance, a 7S26 automatic movement. Case architecture referencing the original 60s diver. It sold for roughly $150. Forums called it the closest thing to a free lunch that horology has ever offered, and they were not wrong. But in 2026, Seiko is pushing standard Prospex divers into the $1,500 to $2,000 range. The 1KD movement powering mid-tier Prospex models is a solid caliber. Automatic, reliable, chronometer regulated on some versions. Nobody is calling the movement itself a problem. The problem is context. At $1,500, a Seiko Prospex is standing in the same aisle as a Tudor Black Bay 54 with Meta's certification, an Oris Aquis with the caliber 400 and a 10-year warranty. Used Rolex Submariner references on the secondary market at accessible prices. In that company, the Seiko story, which remains entirely true, has lost the sharpness that made it extraordinary. Reliable, durable, Japanese precision, used to separate Seiko from the field at this price. Now the field has caught up. Honestly, this is the part that bothers me most about Seiko's current position, because the brand didn't have to make this trade. The SKX was special because it was both genuinely excellent and genuinely accessible to the buyer nobody else was properly serving. Pushing Prospex into $1,500 and $2,000 territory means competing for a buyer who has more choices than ever, and not all of Seiko's options in that tier win that comparison cleanly. A thread on WatchCrunch from early 2026 stayed with me. A member had budgeted $2,000 for his first serious diver. He had grown up wanting a Seiko. He had talked about buying a Prospex for 3 years. He bought a Tudor Black Bay 54 instead. He said he still felt a little guilty about it. The forum's response was interesting. Nobody told him he made the wrong call. A few members said they had made the same call the year before. One person pointed out that he would have felt no guilt at all in 2018, because in 2018, there was no version of that choice where Tudor offered a METAS-certified movement at the same price point. The guilt is a 2026 problem. It's a product of Seiko moving upmarket and Tudor moving downmarket in terms of technical value, until they met in the same aisle and the comparison became unavoidable. That guilt is the whole story. Seiko built loyalty that outlasted the value proposition that earned it. In 2026, the loyalty is being tested in a way the SKX era never had to face. Seiko's dilemma is pricing itself out of its own identity. Brand number 3 had a version of the same problem and handled it in a way that cost collectors serious money. Brand 3, Audemars Piguet. Picture 2018. You're at a watch fair. The Audemars Piguet booth is surrounded. Behind the display glass, a Royal Oak offshore. 45 millimeters of octagonal steel, the thick rubber-clad crown protectors, the mega tapisserie hobnail pattern across the full dial. It retails for around $40,000 on the steel bracelet. There is a waiting list. Secondary market examples are trading at premiums. People are flipping them. Now pull up Chrono 2, 4 for comparable offshore references in 2026. They're sitting. Not selling within days as they did in 2021. Sitting for weeks, some for months. The forum consensus in early 2026 is consistent. The secondary market has rotated towards smaller, more restrained proportions. Collectors who spent the previous several years building positions in oversized sport watches are watching those positions flatten. The offshore is not collapsing, but its extraordinary hype-era premiums are retreating in ways that are uncomfortable for anyone who bought at peak pricing, expecting a continuation. This moment requires some honest history. The Royal Oak Offshore was designed in 1993 by Emmanuel Guite as a sports-amplified version of Gerald Genta's original 1972 Royal Oak. Where the original Royal Oak was restrained and deliberately provocative in a specific way, slender, geometric, and shocking in steel, at a price above most gold dress watches of its era, the offshore doubled every visual element. Bigger crown protectors, more substantial case architecture, more aggressive finishing. Its first nickname was the Beast. That was intended as a compliment, and for 3 decades it functioned as one. But the generation that treated the offshore as the definitive statement piece is aging, and the collectors who came after them, many of whom began buying seriously during the pandemic boom of 2020 to 2022, are now reaching for early Royal Oak references in 39 millimeters for the jumbo format, for complications that reward close inspection rather than instant recognition from across a restaurant. Here's the observation worth sitting with. The offshore's retreat from peak pricing is not a malfunction. It is a return to the mean. The extraordinary premiums were the anomaly. The watch itself, mechanically, is excellent. The Caliber 3126 chronograph movement is a genuine AP manufacture piece with serious finishing and a real pedigree. But mechanical excellence does not insulate a watch from cultural shifts, and the offshore's price was built on cultural currency above all. If you love the offshore and plan to wear it for 20 years, buy it. Great watch. But if you're buying it in 2026, expecting a replay of the 2018 secondary market dynamics, the current data is not agreeing with you. AP's issue is a market correction on cultural momentum. Vacheron's issue is more fundamental, a trust gap written into the architecture of the very first watch they invite you to consider. Brand 2 Vacheron Constantin. There is a stamp in horology called the Geneva Seal, the Poinçon de Genève. It has existed since 1886. To carry it, a movement must be assembled, cased, and regulated in the Canton of Geneva, satisfying 17 specific criteria governing finishing quality and accuracy. The inner angles of bridges must be hand-chamfered. Pivot holes must be polished. Wheels and bridges require specific surface treatments applied by hand. It is one of the most demanding quality certifications in mechanical watchmaking. Vacheron Constantin built their entire brand identity on exactly that level of standard. Founded in 1755, they are the oldest watch manufacturer in continuous, uninterrupted operation. never once closed. The Maltese Cross logo on the dial is not just a design element. It functions as a promise about what exists underneath the caseback. And then there is the 56 self-winding. Introduced at SIHH in Geneva in 2018, the 56 was Vacheron's answer to a question the brand had been circling for years. How do we offer a point of entry to younger, slightly less established buyers without damaging the brand's positioning? The steel 56 self-winding entered at around $11,700 at launch and sits at $11,900 now. The case is elegant. The lug shape references the original reference 6073 from 1956 with genuine fidelity. The dial is clean and well proportioned. As an object, the watch is easy to respect. But the caliber 1326 inside was not designed by Vacheron Constantin. It was produced by manufacturer Horloger Valfleurier, a Richemont Group facility that supplies calibers to multiple brands within the conglomerate. The base architecture of the 1326 is shared with Cartier's 1904 MC movement, the same engine powering the Cartier Tank MC, which retails for considerably less than $12,000. The Piaget Polo S uses another configuration of the same base caliber. Valfleurier produces it, Vacheron assembles, decorates, and regulates it. Meaningful work happens in that final stage, but the fundamental architecture is not Vacheron's own, and the Geneva seal is not on the 56 caseback. The review site Deployant examined the 56 in 2018 and noted specifically that the anglage on certain bridges in the caliber 1326 is executed by CNC machine, without subsequent hand polishing, leaving visible machining marks under magnification. That finishing standard is explicitly prohibited in movements bearing the Geneva seal. Vacheron's own in-house calibers, which do carry the seal, are finished at a measurably higher level. Christian Selmoni, Vacheron's style and heritage director at the time of launch, described the 56 as designed for buyers who were a little bit younger and less financially established than typical Vacheron customers. The intention is understandable. Every luxury brand needs entry points. The industry depends on new generations, discovering great watchmaking and growing with it over decades. And to be precise, the 56 is a better presented object than most watches near this price. The Valfleurier caliber in Vacheron's configuration is decorated more elaborately than the same base appears in Cartier or Piaget versions. But here's what doesn't go away. At $12,000, you are paying for the Maltese Cross. You are paying for the weight of the oldest watchmaker in the world and everything that name carries. The buyer in the boutique connects that price to that promise. And what is inside the watch does not fulfill the promise with the same completeness as Vacheron's own in-house calibers do. The newcomer, walking in, doesn't know to ask about Valfleurier, doesn't know to ask where the Geneva seal is, doesn't know that Cartier runs a version of this movement in a significantly cheaper watch. They see the Maltese Cross, they read the 270-year founding story in the brand booklet, and they trust that everything inside matches everything outside. That gap between the promise and the reality is precisely where the problem lives. Vacheron has 270 years of genuine craft behind them. Brand number 1 has something different going on. Brand 1 Patek Philippe. Let me be clear before anything else. Patek Philippe is, in terms of pure watchmaking achievement, one of the greatest manufacturers alive. The perpetual calendars, the minute repeaters, the caliber 240 automatic movement, one of the thinnest in production watchmaking, visible through the caseback of the Calatrava, finished to a standard that makes experienced watchmakers pause mid-sentence. The technical achievements and finishing standards are not in question here. Nobody credible is arguing otherwise. The trap is not Patek. The trap is one specific decision that collectors are still making in 2026, and it is costing some of them serious money. Chasing the discontinued reference 5711 Nautilus. The 5711 was discontinued in January 2021. Patek Philippe ended production of the steel blue-dialed model in a moment of very public drama involving a brand ambassador and a terminated partnership with the Philips auction house. The watch had retailed at around $34,000 during its final production period. Within months of the discontinuation announcement, examples cleared six figures at auction. By late 2021, certain references were selling for $150,000 or more. The frenzy was real, fully documented, and genuinely extraordinary. In 2026, those numbers are historical memory. Secondary market prices for the 5,711 began retreating from their peaks through late 2024 and into 2025. WatchUSeek forum threads from early 2026 show sellers listing watches at prices they wouldn't have accepted 18 months earlier, with listings sitting without buyers at the ask. The collectors who purchased at retail pricing in 2018 and 2019, or at modest early markups, made extraordinary returns and largely exited. The people who arrived at the party in 2021 and 2022 paying $100,000 or more because the trajectory looked unlimited. They are holding watches worth less than what they paid. This is the 2026 trap. Not the watch, the moment of purchase. Because here's what doesn't get said plainly enough about the 5,711. It was always a vessel. The watch itself is objectively lovely. Gerald Genta's original design applied to a 37mm integrated bracelet format, a Claus de Paris hobnail textured dial, and the caliber 324 SC automatic movement inside. Great watch. But the extraordinary prices it reached were not generated by the watch. They were generated by what the watch meant to own in a specific cultural and economic moment. Exclusivity. Membership in a tier that could access what most people couldn't, regardless of desire. When hedge fund managers and technology investors could simply outspend any waiting list in the room, the exclusivity became purely transactional. And when exclusivity is purely transactional, the premium attached to it starts to erode. The watch didn't change. The feeling of owning it changed. And when the feeling changes, the price of that feeling changes with it. The Patek models serious collectors are moving toward in 2026 look different from the 5,711 conversation. The Golden Ellipse, the Calatrava in steel, annual calendar references from the Nautilus family, specifically the 5,726A, which remains in production and carries the full Patek movement quality and finishing without the discontinued reference speculation attached. These watches don't carry the auction floor notoriety. They carry something more durable, the technical standards that built Patek's reputation in decades when none of us had heard the phrase hype cycle. If you want Patek in 2026, the brand is not the trap. The 5,711 nostalgia is. That said, let's now talk about the three you can actually trust. Before we move on to the next part, let me tell you this. Most people don't realize this, but buying a watch the wrong way can cost you thousands, and you won't even notice it until it's too late. You walk into a store or browse online, and everything looks the same, but behind the scenes, there's a system. Prices aren't always fair, availability is controlled, and one bad decision can leave you overpaying for something that doesn't even hold its value. That's why I created a complete free insider guide to buying watches. Inside, you'll find the best watches to buy, the watches to avoid, and how to choose a watch that actually fits your style and budget long term. The goal is simple. I'll help you stop guessing and start buying smart. You'll find the free guide in the pinned comment and description. Now, let's move on to the next part. Number 1. Grand Seiko. 20 seconds. That is the total annual deviation of Grand Seiko's Spring Drive UFA Caliber 9 RB1. Introduced at Watches and Wonders, 2,026 inches, the Ushio 300 diver, reference SLGB 023. Not 20 seconds per day or week. It's per year, and it's approximately 3 seconds per month. To understand why that number matters, you need a brief look at how the Spring Drive actually works, because it is genuinely unlike anything else in production watchmaking. A conventional mechanical watch uses a lever escapement. A tiny forked component rocks back and forth against the escape wheel, releasing the gear train in tiny equal increments and producing the characteristic tick. The Spring Drive, developed by Grand Seiko engineer Yoshikazu Akahane over 28 years of research before its commercial launch in 1999, replaces that lever with a glide wheel governed by an electronic regulator. The energy still comes from a wound mainspring. The rotor still winds it automatically during wear. But instead of the staccato release of a lever escapement, a quartz crystal oscillator, vacuum-sealed alongside its integrated circuit to protect it from temperature fluctuations, humidity, and static electricity, controls the release of energy through the glide wheel. The seconds hand doesn't tick. It glides, continuously, like the hand of a clock in a long-exposure photograph. The UFA standard, standing for ultra-fine accuracy, was introduced at Watches and Wonders 2025 with the 9RB2 caliber. The 2026 Ushio 300 diver carries a refined iteration. The 9RB1 in a 40.8mm titanium case, rated to 300 meters of water resistance, priced at $12,400 at launch. Power reserve is 72 hours. The oscillator inside each watch undergoes a 3-month aging process before individual calibration. The movement is hand-assembled at the Shinshu Watch Studio in Japan's Nagano Prefecture. For context, the COSC certification, which is the Swiss industry standard for chronometer-grade movements, permits a daily deviation of -4 to +6 seconds. Across a full year, a COSC-certified watch could theoretically deviate by as much as 3,650 seconds. Grand Seiko's UFA movement has a maximum annual deviation of 20 seconds across the same period. Nobody at Grand Seiko ran a marketing campaign making that comparison explicitly. They printed the standard on the dial and moved on. That restraint is, in its own way, the most distinctly Japanese thing about the entire situation. Let's move on to number 2. Number 2, Tudor. When Tudor printed Master Chronometer on the dial of the Black Bay 58 inches 2025, someone at Omega's headquarters in Biel almost certainly had a difficult morning. Master Chronometer is a term Omega created and owns. They developed the METAS certification program with the Swiss Federal Institute of Metrology to prove their movements performed substantially above basic COSC standards. The requirements are significantly more demanding. The complete cased watch, not just the movement in isolation, is tested for accuracy between 0 and +5 seconds per day, magnetic resistance up to 15,000 Gauss, 30 times the standard ISO anti-magnetic requirement. It has verified water resistance at 25% above the rated depth, and confirmed power reserve, all of it under Swiss government oversight at labs inside the manufacturer's own facilities. Tudor, which is Rolex's sibling brand and has directly competed with Omega for decades at its price point, put that same certification on the Black Bay 58. The 2026 Black Bay 58 inches black and gilt starts at $5,350 on the 5-link bracelet, in-house caliber MT 5400U, featuring a silicone hairspring, simultaneously COSC and METAS certified. The cased watch, after full assembly, is tested at 15,000 Gauss. Not a movement on a bench in a laboratory. The actual watch you put on your wrist. Tudor also slimmed the case for 2026, down to 11.7 millimeters compared to 11.9 on the outgoing generation. Modest in numbers, noticeable when the watch is on your wrist. The 5-link bracelet option added this year suits the proportions of the 39mm case particularly well, and the T-Fit clasp allows tool-free micro-adjustment across 8mm. The black and gilt colorway is the version long-time collectors had been waiting for since the Metis generation launched in Burgundy in 2025. Tudor confirmed it at Watches and Wonders 2026. For many people in the community, this is the Black Bay 58 they had been holding off for since the generation update began. Tudor did something quiet and highly effective. They raised the technical floor of their core collection to a level that embarrasses brands charging double, without raising their prices to match. You don't need to love the mushroom crown or the vintage aesthetic, but you can't honestly argue the value proposition isn't exceptional. And still on a watch being exceptional, check number 3 out. Number 3, Oris. Every watch brand will tell you how good their watch is, Oris is the only independent Swiss manufacturer that has put that confidence into formal warranty terms for 10 years. The Caliber 400, developed entirely in-house at Oris's facility in Holstein, Switzerland, and launched in 2020, carries a 10-year warranty on all watches registered at MyOris, alongside 10-year recommended service intervals. The industry context makes this significant. Most Swiss mechanical watches recommend service every 3 to 5 years. At an authorized service center for brands like Rolex, Omega, or IWC, a standard service runs from roughly $500 to over $1,000, depending on the movement's complexity. Over a 10-year ownership period, you have paid that bill 2 or 3 times before the decade closes. Oris is saying, with the Caliber 400, you don't need to. They can say that because of what the movement is made of. The escape wheel and anchor are silicon, a material that requires no lubrication the way steel does, and that resists magnetism without needing a dedicated inner case shield. More than 30 movement components are made from non-ferrous or non-magnetic alloys. The rotor uses a sliding bearing system rather than a ball bearing system, eliminating one of the most common mechanical stress points in automatic calibers. Laboratoire Dubois tested the Caliber 400 at 2250 Gauss. The ISO standard for anti-magnetic classification requires a watch to stay accurate within 30 seconds per day after exposure to 200 Gauss. The Caliber 400 recorded less than 10 seconds of deviation after exposure to more than 11 times that force. Daily accuracy is -3 to +5 seconds, which already meets and slightly exceeds the COSC requirement of -4 to +6. 5-day power reserve. Twin mainspring barrels, each storing 2.5 days of power, meaning the watch keeps running from Thursday evening through Monday morning without being worn. The Aquastate Caliber 400 is available at around $3,000. For a genuine in-house movement with this specification sheet, a 10-year warranty, class-leading anti-magnetism, a 5-day reserve, and a design that wears as well as almost anything at twice the price, there is no honest comparable in the tier. Oris doesn't do celebrity campaigns. They don't have a waiting list you can mention at dinner. What they have is an engineering team in Holstein that apparently took the warranty promise seriously enough to design an entirely new movement around it, rather than designing a movement first and calculating how long a warranty they could attach without significant financial exposure. Think about what a 10-year warranty actually means for Oris as a company. If a movement fails within 10 years and Oris covers it at their own cost, they absorb that service bill, which means they have a direct financial reason to make a movement that genuinely doesn't fail within 10 years. The warranty is not a marketing promise, sitting at the end of a press release. It is an engineering contract the company signs with itself before it signs with the customer. If Oris gets this wrong, it costs them money. That alignment between the brand's financial interest and the customer's long-term experience is vanishingly rare in any industry, let alone luxury goods. That is not a small distinction. That is the whole difference. The brands charging the most for the least internal honesty don't fail because of bad design. They survive because most buyers never look under the dial. They trust the name, they trust the boutique, they trust the price, because something that expensive must be worth it. But it's 2026. The information is not locked away behind specialist knowledge anymore. The forums are full of watchmakers, engineers, and collectors who have opened every caseback, read every service document, and written down what they found. The hiding is over. The watches worth buying are the ones that don't need you to look away. If you own something from the trust list, a Grand Seiko UFA, a Meta-certified Black Bay, or an Oris Caliber 400, drop the reference in the comments. Let's build something useful down there. And if you're sitting on a decision about an entry-level Holy Trinity piece right now, look up the movement architecture before you walk into that boutique. 2 minutes of research. That's the difference between wearing history and paying for the feeling of it. Like this video and subscribe if you want more of this.